The call came at 4:47 in the morning, and I know the exact time because I'd been awake since 3. Sitting in the recliner my wife always said made the living room look like a garage sale. My son's voice was the first thing I heard, not the ringtone. His voice already talking before I could say hello, and something about that told me everything before the words made any sense. "Dad, it's Meredith. They took her in an ambulance. You need to come." Meredith is my daughter-in-law. She's been married to my son for 11 years, and I'll be honest with you, I never thought much of her in the beginning. Thought she was too careful with money that wasn't hers yet, too interested in what things cost and who owned what. My wife used to tell me I was being unfair. She was probably right. She usually was. My wife passed 3 years ago, pancreatic cancer. 6 weeks from diagnosis to the end, and the whole time she kept apologizing to me, like she was the one causing trouble. I still don't know how to explain what that kind of loss does to a man. You just learn to function around it, like a missing tooth. You stop reaching for it eventually. So I drove to the hospital alone at 5 in the morning, the highway empty in a way that felt wrong, and I kept thinking about my wife the whole way there, thinking how she would have been in the passenger seat already dressed and telling me to slow down. My son met me in the waiting room. He's 51 years old, and he looked, that morning, like he was about 30, the kind of 30 that hasn't slept or eaten and doesn't know what comes next. "She collapsed," he said, "in the kitchen. I heard her fall." Meredith had been having headaches for weeks. She hadn't told anyone except her sister. My son didn't find out until a neighbor mentioned she'd seen Meredith sitting on the front steps looking pale, and even then Meredith said it was nothing. Stress, the season changing. She was 44 years old and healthy by every measure she'd been willing to share with a doctor, which it turned out wasn't many. They took her in for scans and kept us in a waiting room that smelled like burnt coffee and floor wax, and my son sat with his elbows on his knees and his hands folded between them and didn't say much. I went to get water from the machine in the hall. When I came back, my son's phone was face up on the chair beside him and he wasn't looking at it, but I saw the screen. Not on purpose. I saw it the way you see something you weren't meant to, the way a word catches your eye on a page you weren't reading. It was a banking app. And the number in the account balance field was not the number I expected to see for a man who'd spent 30 years in civil engineering and lived carefully his entire adult life. I sat down, handed him the water, said nothing. I am 63 years old. I have buried a wife, outlasted 2 business partners, and raised a son mostly on my own after his mother got sick. I have learned that the thing you see in a flash doesn't always mean what you think, and the worst mistake you can make is speaking before you understand the full shape of what you're looking at. So I waited. Meredith had a subdural hematoma, blood pooling between the skull and the brain from a fall she'd taken 3 weeks earlier and hadn't told anyone about, because she was Meredith, and Meredith didn't like to be a problem. The surgeon was calm and efficient, and used the phrase, cautiously optimistic. Twice in 4 minutes my son nodded like he understood. I don't think he heard a word after surgery. They took her up around 8 in the morning. My son and I sat in the surgical waiting room. He got coffee. I didn't want any. At some point I asked him how things were going. Vague enough to mean anything. Specific enough that he'd know I didn't mean Meredith. Not in that moment. He looked at me for a long time. Then he said, "Her brother borrowed some money." That's how it started. Her brother borrowed some money. That's the sentence my son used to describe the slow dismantling of everything he'd built, the way you might describe fender bender to your insurance company. Calm, factual, drained of all the weight the actual thing had carried. Her brother's name is Sefton. He's 3 years younger than Meredith, and he has always had a project. Every time I saw him at a holiday dinner or a birthday party, he had a project. Real estate, then a restaurant, then something with shipping containers he could never quite explain clearly. My wife had opinions about Sefton that she kept to herself most of the time, but I could always tell when he'd been mentioned because her expression would go very still, like she was choosing words carefully. Sefton had borrowed money twice before, small amounts. Both times repaid, slowly, but repaid. My son considered this history when Sefton came to him with a third request, and he made what he believed was a reasonable decision. And Meredith had agreed, and the 2 of them had moved $30,000 into a separate account to give to Sefton for what he said was a gap loan on a property deal closing in 60 days. That was 14 months ago. The 60 days became 90. Then the deal restructured. Then Sefton stopped responding to texts and started responding to calls with short messages about complications and pending contracts and the way commercial lending had slowed down in this particular market. My son showed me some of the texts later. They were masterpieces of delay, full of just enough detail to sound real and just enough vagueness to explain away anything. The $30,000 was gone. And while my son had been patient about the $30,000, waiting for the deal to close, waiting for Sefton to come through, something else had been happening that my son didn't know about yet. Meredith had been giving Sefton money on her own, not $30,000, more. I found this out not in the hospital, not that first morning, but 2 weeks later, after Meredith came home and the surgeon said she'd need rest and limited stress, and my son was managing her care and the household and his job all at the same time. And one evening he called me and his voice had a quality I hadn't heard since his mother died. I found the transfers, he said. He'd been going through the joint account to track expenses for the insurance claim, and he found a pattern of transfers he didn't recognize. Not large, not obvious, between $400 and $1,200 at a time, over the course of 22 months, to an account he didn't know. He'd called the bank. The account belonged to Sefton, $112,000, over 22 months. While my son thought the household savings were stable, while Meredith told him they should probably hold off on the roof repair, while she said it wasn't the right time to look at replacing the car. I drove to my son's house the next morning. I didn't call first, I just drove. He was sitting at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and a calculator and 3 bank statements spread in front of him, and he looked like a man doing homework he should have done years ago, the kind of homework where the grade no longer matters, but you finish it anyway because you don't know what else to do. I sat across from him. I looked at the statements. I asked him what he needed from me. He said, "I don't know how to talk to her about this." I said, "I know." Here is the truth about Meredith, the truth I'd understood slowly over 11 years and now understood completely. She loved her brother the way people love things that are already lost. She'd been covering for him her whole life. Their father had been the same kind of man, charming, full of plans, never quite landing on solid ground. Meredith had watched her mother manage that for 30 years, quietly, and she'd inherited the management without inheriting any of the circumstances that created it, and she'd applied it to Sefton with the same patience her mother had applied to her father, which is to say, endlessly, invisibly, and at her own expense. She wasn't malicious. That's the thing. That's what made the whole thing almost impossible to be clean about. She had taken money from their shared life and given it to her brother without telling my son, and she had done it because she believed she was handling a problem that wasn't worth worrying him about, and she had been wrong about all of it. Wrong to do it alone, wrong to keep doing it, wrong to think Sefton would eventually become the version of himself she'd been waiting for. But none of that wrongness came from cruelty. It came from love applied in the wrong direction for the wrong amount of time. That doesn't make it okay. I want to be clear about that. My son lost a year of sleep and 11 years of savings assumptions, and the specific kind of trust that once gone has to be rebuilt from different materials than the original. None of that is okay. I'm not saying it is. I'm saying it was complicated. My son talked to Meredith 3 days after he found the transfers. He waited until she'd had a good day, which the doctors said mattered for her recovery, and then he sat with her in the living room after dinner and told her what he'd found. She didn't deny it. That was the first thing. She just said, "I know." And then she said, "I'm sorry." And then she cried in a way I've been told about but didn't see. The kind of crying that isn't about getting sympathy but about finally being seen doing something wrong that you've been carrying alone. My son called me that night. He wasn't crying, he was somewhere past that. He said, "She asked me what I want to do." I said, "What do you want to do?" He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I want Sefton to pay us back," which I appreciated. It was a practical answer. It pointed forward. I have a friend who has been a real estate attorney for 30 years. I called him the next morning. We met for coffee, and I described the situation, and he listened without interrupting, which is something I've always respected about him. When I finished, he set down his cup and said, "The brother is the problem. Everything else is solvable." He referred me to a colleague who handles civil recovery. She was direct and clear and did not waste time on sympathy or judgment, which I found a relief. She reviewed the bank transfers, the texts between Sefton and my son about the original $30,000 loan, and several emails Meredith had sent Sefton over the course of 2 years that my son had found in an old tablet Meredith used for recipes and grocery lists. The emails were illuminating. Sefton had been, in legal terms my son's attorney would later use, making representations, promising repayment on specific timelines, describing the money as loans in writing, referencing real properties and real deals, some of which existed and some of which did not. That, the attorney explained, was fraud, not the sloppy, informal kind, the kind that had a paper trail. Sefton did not know when the demand letter arrived at his door that Meredith had given us the tablet. He did not know she'd handed over the emails willingly. He did not know that she had sat with my son in their living room and said, "I'll tell you everything," and then done exactly that. I think he expected her to protect him, the way she always had, because he'd never given her a reason to believe the protection would ever stop. He was wrong. This is the part of the story where I want to be careful, because I am not a man who celebrates legal processes or other people's humiliation. I watched enough of that in my working years, disputes that cost everyone more than they recovered and ended with everyone diminished. I don't take pleasure in it, but I will tell you what the attorney said when Sefton's own lawyer reached back with an opening position. She called my son and said, he wants to settle. He says he can return $60,000 over 3 years. My son looked at me. We were in my kitchen. He had the phone on speaker between us. I said nothing. He said, what do you recommend? She said, I recommend we go back with the full amount, a 2-year timeline, and a personal guarantee on his assets, or we file. Sefton's lawyer called back within 48 hours. I don't know exactly what was said between Sefton and his attorney in those 48 hours, and I don't particularly want to know. What I know is that a settlement agreement was signed. Full amount. Payments beginning in 30 days, secured by a lien on a property Sefton actually owned. A piece of land outside Knoxville he'd been holding for 12 years, which it turned out was worth considerably more than the debt. My son told me about the signing on a Sunday. We were at my house. His wife was home recovering. They were not, at that point, in a good place with each other. You don't resolve 11 years of quiet misdirection in a few weeks. But they were in the same house, and they were talking, and they were both in it, which I've learned is most of what staying married actually requires. My granddaughter, their youngest, had been visiting me for the weekend. She's 8. She found a box of old photographs in my hall closet and pulled it out and was sitting on the floor with pictures spread around her like she was making a map. She held one up at me. It was my wife and me, 1987, at a friend's wedding on Long Island. My wife was wearing something yellow that I couldn't name the color of now if you asked. She was laughing at something off camera. My granddaughter said, "Who's that?" I said, "That's your grandmother." She looked at the picture for a while. Then she said, "She looks happy." "Hey, she was," I said. My son was standing in the doorway to the kitchen. He'd been there a moment, I think, watching. He looked at me and then at the picture and then at his daughter on the floor with the photographs around her. He didn't say anything. I didn't either. Some things you don't need words for, especially when you've lived long enough to know that the hard seasons pass and what you're left with, if you paid attention, is a life that still holds. Meredith had a follow-up with the surgeon that week. The scan was clear. The surgeon used the word remarkable and then clarified what she meant by it and then used it again. My son sent me a text from the waiting room with 2 words. She's good. I read it standing at my kitchen counter and said out loud to no one, "Okay, good." The money situation wasn't resolved the way I would have written it. Sefton made his first payment on time. He made the second 6 days late and sent a note with it that said he was working on it, which my son forwarded to me without comment. The lien is in place. The attorney is watching. I don't expect it to be simple, because nothing about Sefton has ever been simple, and men like that don't change because a piece of paper tells them to. But the money is coming back. Not fast. But back. Meredith spent a long time in those months going through what I can only describe as the reckoning a person goes through when they finally see the thing they've been carrying clearly for the first time. She'd been managing Sefton since she was 19 years old. She'd defined a part of herself around it, around being the one who handled it, the one who kept him from the worst of himself. Letting go of that was not straightforward, and I'm not going to pretend I understood all of it. But she and my son started seeing a counselor in the spring. Neither of them mentioned it until it had been going for about 6 weeks, and when my son brought it up, he was matter-of-fact about it, like it was a thing people did, which I suppose it is. I didn't say much. I don't think he needed me to. I've learned at 63 that the most useful thing a parent can do for an adult child who is in pain is to make it clear you're still there. You don't fix it. You can't. But you can be somewhere they know to go when they need to talk at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday, or when they find a box of photographs and need someone else in the room to recognize the woman in the yellow dress. My son came over on a Saturday in May. He came alone, which was unusual. He said Meredith had asked him to bring me something. It was a photo, one I'd never seen. From a birthday party, I think. There were streamers in the background and someone's kitchen I didn't recognize. My wife was in it, and so was Meredith, and they were standing together with their heads tilted toward each other, laughing. I don't know who took it. I didn't know it existed. My son said, "She found it in an old box from her mom's house. She said she wanted you to have it." I held it for a while. My wife's face. Meredith's face. Some ordinary afternoon years ago that I wasn't there for and hadn't thought to wonder about. I set it on the kitchen table. My son sat down. I made coffee. We talked for 2 hours, the kind of talking that doesn't have a clear subject and doesn't need one. The kind that is really about sitting in the same room long enough to remember who you are to each other. Before he left, he said, "Mom would have handled this better than both of us." I said, "She would have handled it faster, not necessarily better." He laughed. It was the first time I'd heard him laugh in months. I watched him back out of the driveway, and then I went inside and put the photograph on the shelf in the living room where I can see it from the recliner. The one my wife said made the room look like a garage sale. I sat down. The house was quiet in the way it's been quiet for 3 years, the specific quiet of a space that was built for more people than are currently in it. But it didn't feel empty the way it sometimes does. It felt like enough.